I'm Roger Mendham, and I was really pleased to be asked to put this talk together as part of Mole Valley's Heritage Open Week programme for 2020. The title of the talk is Hidden Nature, Hidden Treasures, and it gave me the opportunity to explore Mole Valley and look at the beauty of the heritage buildings and assets that we've got and the glorious countryside that we live in. Let me just share this screen with you and we will take you straight through, if I press that button, to the talk. You should all now be able to see a view of the Mole River as it runs under one of the railway arches here in Leatherhead, next to where I live. So here is a map of our area, Mole Valley, part of Surrey. And in preparing this talk, I've travelled the length and breadth. I've been to the towns, the villages, the hamlets. I've explored most of the roads in the area. And I've been really amazed at what I've been able to see. And what I want to do is share with you some of the lesser known heritage buildings that we've got, some of the flora, fauna, the wildlife that we've got. And I want to encourage you to take a kind of fresh look at the surroundings that we have here in Mole Valley. I needed a start point, and so I went to the Mole Valley website, and I had a look at their listed buildings. There are in excess of 1,000 grade 2, 2-star and grade 1 listed buildings. And as you can see, I got my highlighters out and I started running through it because I had to kind of filter it down to get it into manageable proportions. Some were easy. In terms of grade 1 listed buildings, there are only 6. And I'll cover them in a single frame in a minute or two. Another grouping that I came across were churches and places of worship. And there are 26 grade 2 and 2-star listed places of worship here in Mole Valley. Interestingly enough, there is an equal number of pubs, 26, that are grade 2 and grade 2-star listed. And when I looked at them, in many cases, they're adjacent to each other. In this case, this is in Mickleham, and they're across the road from each other. And I was reminded of the saying that there's always a thirst after righteousness. Now, in looking for a structure to put on this talk, I thought about having a kind of glorious pub crawl throughout Mole Valley, but decided that actually I would use a number of the places of worship to guide us through our area. So first of all, the grade ones. Going from bottom left clockwise round it, St John the Evangelist at Wootton, possibly my favourite church of all of the ones I have found in my travels. Then St Nicholas, which is my local church here in Bookham. Then right up at the top, just across the road from the Yehudi Menuhin School, if you know that area, you've got Slyfield Manor and Slyfield Farmhouse. And then round to St Michael's at Betchworth. And if you've seen the film 4 Weddings and a Funeral, this is the church for wedding number 1. Great fun, that film. And then finally, you've got St Nicholas with an H down at Charlwood, down in the bottom right-hand corner. These are the 6 grade 1 assets, and with the exception of St John the Evangelist, I'm not going to be mentioning them again in this talk. My start point then was to look at the River Mole, and I went in search of the source of it. And it took me down south of Mole Valley. Now you'll notice in the top left-hand corner, I've got a map with a red dot on it. I use that all the way through this talk, every time I move from different location, so you have an idea of where we are in our area of Mole Valley. So this is just outside Rusper, a small town, village, and which actually has a lovely grade 1 listed church. But here you have the first real sight that you can get of the River Mole. It starts in a spring up in the woods to our front and several hundred yards up that hillside, and it comes down and it gathers in this pond, which is part of a farm. The farmhouse is off to our right. And so the River Mole starts here and then flows off to our right down towards Gatwick Airport. and it goes underneath the runway at Gatwick. Were you aware that everyone who kind of take off and lands at Gatwick Airport goes over the River Mole? It runs in a culvert underneath the runway. And then it reappears at that rather chaotic and busy roundabout next to the North Terminal, and here it is. It's not one of the great rivers of the United Kingdom, but it's our river, and it's important because Mole Valley is the area that we're going to look at. And I'm going to start down in this corner of our area and take you here. This is an interesting building. It looks quite out of place for rural Surrey. It's the sort of building that would be much more at home in colonial America, for example, with that large veranda. But it dates back to Napoleonic times. And there's a very good notice board there, and it gives you the history of Providence Chapel and the fact that it was assembled in 1797 down at Horsham. And I like the way that it was after the Battle of Waterloo in 1815 that a farmer bought it and moved it by kind of horse and cart, and it became this chapel. It was a non-conformist chapel, and in its heyday, it had a congregation of about 150, but that dwindled over time, and in 2013, it was acquired by a trust. It's been renovated, and the nice thing about Providence Chapel is that it is going to be open as part of the Heritage Open Days this year. Highly recommended, well worth a visit, because it's full of character. Both the building and the kind of gravestones that you see around this building are very much of that period and kind of contribute to the character of that building and its setting. If you move only a few hundred yards from Providence Chapel, you'll come across this little building in Charwood. A little square, almost kind of tea caddy shaped building. And you can see a reflection of me as the photographer in the glass on the door. It's surrounded by housing. And if you look at the black oval sign that's there next to the door, and I expand it, it'll tell you that this building is called the Cage, and it was the local jail. This is where they locked up miscreants after they'd been up to whatever you got up to in the late 18th century. And you were held there before you were put in front of the judge the following day. Lovely to see a little building like this that's been retained and maintained as part of our heritage asset now, 2 centuries on. I'm now going to move across, and we're moving across the south of our area. And I use a number of shots that are taken in the forests, the trees, the woods that we've got throughout the seasons. And here we have bluebell season. We're in spring. And we're in Henfield Lane in Newdigate. And there are a number of areas where you'll find bluebells throughout our area. And what I want to do is I want to take us through these lovely natural areas, and I'm going to take us to the bottom left-hand corner of Mole Valley, to this little church that sits quite isolated in amongst the woods, and it's as close to being in the middle of nowhere as you can get in Mole Valley. I always look at it and I think it's a sort of chapel that if Walt Disney had been looking for a model for a chapel in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, this is the sort of church I think he would have chosen. There are no significant roads around it. There are no villages around it. It is truly just in amongst the woods, and you have to go down a little narrow lane to get to it. And you wonder why it was there. But remember, this is a 13th century church. It has been modified and renovated. A lot of work was done during the Victorian period. But in its heyday, we are, of course, in the age before the major roads were built. And the way people travelled was on foot and on horseback. And the whole series of footpaths and bridle ways that were in this area converged at the point where this chapel is. And that is the reason why it was built here. It's very peaceful. Its congregation love it as a church, and it's very well worth a visit, including into the graveyard, because the graveyard is very peaceful, set in amongst the trees. Going to move north now, back up through more woods, and a change of season. I'm now looking at the woods as we've moved into the autumn, when you get this wonderful colour comes into the leaves on the trees, they fall, and you get this carpet of leaves, which kids love running through. And I think it shows off the beauty of the woodland that we've got. And the place I'm heading for is here, Forest Green. And on the green of a Sunday in the summer, you'll see them playing cricket. And there's a rather nice pub on the edge of the green where you can sit outside and have a glass of something cool and refreshing as you watch the cricket. And then in the trees behind there is this little chapel. Small, but beautiful. And of particular importance is this window that I've just put an arrow up to now. If you look inside, it'll take a congregation of about 90, and that's standing room only by the time you reach 90. But it is that window that's very important. And if I look at some of the detail on that window, at the top, that's the top half of that stained glass window. And it's like a photograph. It's a photo representation of a young man. And the inscription at the bottom of that that stained glass window says, "To the glory of God and in the memory of Ernest Charles Hemsley." And notice the dates. 1874 to 1892. He was 18 when he died. He had gone out rabbiting and sadly was shot by his cousin and lost his life. And this chapel was built by his parents in his memory. Beautiful, small chapel, open to the public, well worth visiting. If we keep moving further north, we're heading up and we're going to park in a National Trust car park and then head off up through the woods. In this case, we're still in the autumn, and we've got this kind of very misty sunlight that comes down through the trees at that time of year. And the place we're heading for is Leith Hill. Sits on the top of the Greentown Ridge, in a nice, clear, open space. And this tower was built in 1765 by Richard Hull. And when he passed away, he was actually buried underneath the tower. It's in a very prominent position. If you go to the top of it, the height at the top is 313 meters, and that is the highest point in southeast England. And you've got a view that it's clear up to the north, and you can see the arch at Wembley, you can see the Shard, you've got a view up to London. And if you look to the south, you can see down to the coast, which is 26 miles away to the south. The other important thing about Leith Hill is, of course, as part of our heritage, there is the Leith Hill musical competition every year. This festival of music, which is one of the premier choral festivals in the country, started in 1905 by Margaret Vaughan Williams, sister of the conductor, Ralph Vaughan Williams, and they lived at Leith Hill Place. And that competition, the musical festival, has been held now for 115 years. But tragically, of course, this year, because of COVID, it hasn't taken place. And there are 12 local choirs that hopefully will be competing again next year. Let's have a look at the view as you look south. If you look to the south from the top of the hill, you get this lovely view, and you can see the road down in the bottom left-hand corner that's heading down to Ockley, and it'll eventually go down to Billingshurst, and you can go further south from there. Nice countryside. But if you go there on a cold and crispy December morning, early in the morning, and walk your way down that hill, you'll get a view like this. you get this temperature inversion layer as the mist that has settled overnight begins to clear, and you begin to be able to see the trees emerging from it. And it's almost magical, very atmospheric. And if you then go further down the hill again, wait for the sun to get a little bit higher and the mist to be able to clear a little bit more, you can take a shot like this. And you can tell that the sun has got up quite a bit because you can see the shadow underneath that tree. And these were taken on the front of Leith Hill, looking south on a cold and clear, misty December morning. We work our way up the left-hand side of Mont Valley, we'll end up into the Surrey Hills, an area of outstanding natural beauty. One of 46 such areas across the country established in the late 1950s. And for Surrey, this area of outstanding natural beauty represents about 25% of the total area of the county. It's a large area. And I want to take us along the A25, heading towards Dorking. As you drive along, if you look off to your left, you might get a view like this. And this summer, if we take them over a cornfield that's growing in front of you, you can just see in amongst the trees this church. Tricky to find, down a little narrow lane, and it will take you to this, St. John the Evangelist. And this is the one Grade 1 listed building that I said I was going to cover. Wootton is a small place. As a parish, it's small. At the last census, the total population of Wootton was under 600. And the largest building, the most prominent building, is Wootton House, which is now a hotel. This church has got a long history that goes back to the 11th century. And what I like is if you look at the right-hand end of the church, you get this view, and this view almost tells you the history in one piece. If I start on the far left with the tower, it has this kind of double pyramid structure, unique. There's no other church in Surrey that's got that shape tower on it. But at this end, the porch on the left, that's 19th century. And then as you go across, there are these three distinctive sections to it. And they are 11th century, 13th century, and 17th century in their construction. I'm really pleased with the way that they have maintained the unique nature of these various elements of this church. And the white-ended element is the Evelyn family chapel. And John Evelyn, who was a diarist in the 17th century, born and lived in Wootton House. And this was his church, and he and his wife Mary are buried in that chapel. Of all of the churches that I visited when I was researching this talk, this is the one that I was most fond of. It is a beautiful church, and its setting is absolutely stunning, but you have to work at it to find it. Back up onto the A25, heading towards Dorking, and we get to Westcott. Now, in Westcott, there's a large dominant church on our right-hand side, Holy Trinity, a George Gilbert Scott church. But actually, on the left-hand side, as you get into Westcott, you'll see this view. You see the top of this building, it just appears between the trees. And if you take a left turn and go down and look at it, it's here. It was formerly St. John's Free Church. And for 150 years, from the mid-19th century, this was an evangelical church. Countess of Huntingdon's connection. A small church, which is still active throughout this country, and has got links into overseas areas like Sierra Leone. But today, it is a community asset. It's a community hall, and it's probably busier than it's ever been in its lifetime. Everything from toddler groups to mother groups to other community groups use it. And it's wonderful to see a building like this that has got a rich history as a religious building is now being used by the community and adding real value to all of the people and the community who live around it. But I love its history. Continuing on into Dorking, if you park up around the back of the church next to the Marks and Spencers, you get this view. And it takes you across to Denby's hillside. You can see part of the vineyard, and the Denby's vineyard in front of you. But then going up on top of the hill, you're getting into the hillside, and then beyond that, you've got Ranmore Common. And it's Ranmore Common that I want to take you to now, because I want to take you to another church. I just mentioned George Gilbert Scott in Westcott. But here is probably his masterpiece of the local area. This is St. Barnabas, the Ranmore Church. Now, George Gilbert Scott was one of the leading Victorian architects, particularly for religious buildings. And he was involved in 800 architectural projects, buildings and renovations. And this is his best one here. And it was built in the 1850s. And it was built for George Cubitt, who became the first Baron Ashcombe, who was the local landowner of the area, which is now the Denby's estate. When you stand where I am to take this photograph, here at the car park where the road is, if you go up to the church, you go through the Lich Gate on the right, but there's no entrance to the church on this side. There's no entrance on the right-hand end of it, or the left-hand end of it. And you actually have to go around the back of it to be able to get into it, which seems illogical until you think about when it was built. Because, of course, in the 1850s, we are pre-motor cars here in Surrey. And the people who would come to this church came from the local big house and from the estate. And they would come on foot or pony and trap, or on ponies. And that's why they would come to the far side of the church, because that is the way that they would have come from, up from the Denby's estate. There is inside it a very good chapel, the Cubitt Chapel, which is a memorial to the three sons of the second Baron Ashcombe, who tragically lost their lives in the First World War. Beautiful church. But if we go from here and we go right, and we get to the top of Denby's hillside, Steersfield. And if you look down there to the left, you can see Dorking and the spire of the church where we were a few minutes ago. If we pan around, in the middle, you've got this view, and you can see Leith Hill sticking up there on the top of the Greensand Ridge. To be fair, you need a fairly long lens on your camera to be able to take a shot like this, but it shows how Leith Hill stands out in amongst those trees. And then if you keep going to the right, we're now up Ranmore Common, heading in the direction of Wootton, Abergahammer, pointing in the direction of Guildford. There, down in the valley, you can see the railway line. That's the Guildford, Dorking, Redhill, Gatwick Airport. I'm always interested to note that Dorking, for a relatively small town, has got 3 railway stations. But if you're interested in trains and you walk down that hill, it's a fairly steep walk, you can get down beside the railway line, and several times a year you get the Heritage Line running and the steam trains come through. And if someone like me, and I was brought up next to a railway line down in South Devon, to see steam trains coming through, it is the sight, it is the sound, and dare I say it, it is the smell of a steam train as it goes thundering by that is very nostalgic. And also last year, we had the Flying Scotsman come through a couple of times. So if you like steam trains, go down to the railway line. It's quite a hike when you come back up. But when you come back up to the top, you've got the North Downs Way, which is used a lot. A lot of walkers go down through there. But if you go just off the track, And from where I'm standing when I took this photograph, literally within 25 yards of where I took this photograph, the right time of year, you'll find wild orchids growing. There are bluebells, and yet just beyond the bluebells, there are a couple of patches of orchids growing there up on the top of Ranmore Common. And these were taken last year. If you go down through those woods, you come out on the front and you're on the top of a south-facing chalk down hillside. And that's the sort of terrain where you'll find these, which is a paschal flower, which has gone through its flower stage, the leaves have died back, and you're now into the seed stage. And you have this wonderful, it's almost like an allium when it goes through to that stage, and it's in a dried flower stage. Quite unusual. It has to be a south-facing chalk hillside to find them, and Ranmore Common is one of the very few areas that you'll find them here in Surrey. You'll find thistles and you'll find things like this. And this is a very distinctive 6-spot burnet, and it's a moth. Slightly unusual moth, because this is a moth that flies in the daytime. The majority of moths are creatures of the night. And in addition to moths, you get the butterflies. Now, here is a brimstone butterfly. I happened to take this one in my garden earlier this year. But up on Ranmore Common, there are 31 different breeds of butterfly at varying times throughout the year. And some of them are quite rare. Here's an example. This is the Adonis blue. It only occurs in 2 areas in Surrey. It occurs on Ranmore Common and part of Box Hill. And the key to finding it is to understand its life cycle. And what you need to do is you need to find the horseshoe vetch. Because this yellow flower is the one flower that the Adonis blue feeds on. So there's a strong relationship between the butterfly and the plant. If you go at the right time up onto Ranmore Common and find the horseshoe vetch, you can find up to 30 of the Adonis blues there at any one time. And September is a time that you can find them. There are 9 of the rarer butterflies that occur up there. And all of these photographs have been taken on Ranmore Common. You've got the Adonis blue, you've got the hair streaks, the brown hair streak and the green hair streak. You've got the chalk hill blue, the dark green fritillary, which is difficult to identify because the dark green bit is not actually very prominent. And the skippers. You've got the dingy, the grizzled, and the silver spotted skippers, and the lovely marbled white. Now you'll notice that I've marked 3 of them with a red cross. And that is because those 3 you won't find in September. They appear at different times of the year. The other 6 you can potentially see this month if you go onto Ranmore Common and you know where to look. People go to places like the RHS at Wisley when they have butterflies in the greenhouse. And there you will see a wonderful display of predominantly Central American butterflies. But actually, if you go onto Ranmore Common and you take your time and you go and look hard, you will find a greater variety of beautiful butterflies than you'll ever find in somewhere like a display at the RHS. Now I'm going to come down off. Before I come down, I just want to look up. Sorry about that. Because the view from Ranmore Common, you actually see the birds of prey that fly above our area. We get a lot of different birds of prey. This one's a buzzard. For the first time that I can remember, we've got buzzards nesting about 250 yards away from where I live in Bookham. And I regularly see this buzzard flying over my house. Also, if you go up to Polston Lacey, you get peregrine falcons. Now they fly very fast and they are very difficult to photograph. And this is as good as I've ever got of a peregrine falcon in flight. But the other bird of prey that you'll see quite a lot of are the red kites. And this is a shot from a friend of mine, a beautiful shot of this wonderful bird of prey. And now we can head south. go back down the hill and head to the Denbies wine estate. Denbies. It is the largest wine estate in the country. And over the years, its range of wines and the quality of its wines has constantly improved, and it is now producing award-winning wines. A lovely place. Good place to go and visit, not necessarily at the height of the day, because if you pick your time, it is beautiful. This is taken very late afternoon. You can tell that the sun is over in the west, coming down to set, and that's why you've got these lengthening shadows as you look across the vineyard. If you go in the autumn, you'll go and you'll see the vines, how the grapes have been picked, and now all of the leaves on the vines are beginning to age as we're moving into the winter season. But from Denbies, you get this view. It's across the vineyard, and it takes you up the hillside, and it takes you up to my next port of call, which is Box Hill. If you go up onto Box Hill, the most popular place for people to go is they go to the viewpoint. There is kind of trig point and a viewpoint, and here you can see right in the forefront the kind of concrete wall of that viewpoint, and it says Dorking 1 mile, and the arrow's pointing in the right direction, and it takes you down across the cricket ground to that church. A lot of people go up on top of Box Hill. They go to the viewpoint, and there's a large open area where you can picnic and children can play football, and it's lovely to see people using it. But it's also lovely to see people walking and enjoying the nature that you've got on top of Box Hill. If you walk through the woods, go in the autumn, you get the lovely speckled sunlight coming down through the trees. But there are also things on top of Box Hill that I think people don't really see because they go for the obvious. And you've got to look hard to find the interesting. Like Swiss Cottage, where John Logie Baird lived. He was the inventor of television. And if you walk, and there's a very good footpath that goes round the top, you come across this. And I've stood in this position, I've seen people walking along this footpath, and they just walk straight past it. They have no interest in it. It's just something there that's at the side of the footpath. But those of us who live in the area know that it's a tombstone. And it's that interesting tombstone to Peter Labillier, described as a local eccentric resident, who decided he wanted to be buried head down on top of Box Hill. And there it is. That is his tombstone, up on Box Hill, and yet people just walk straight past it. The views from up there are lovely. And again, choose your time of year, because late autumn, early winter, you can have this lovely view. In the foreground, you've got Betchworth Golf Club, and you can see people out there having an early morning round of golf. And then in the middle distance, you can see the spire of Brockham Church. Isn't that a lovely view? But you do have to get out of bed pretty early in the morning if you want to get and enjoy that view. So we come down, and we come down Zigzag Hill. And this, in the road, this is a piece of land art by Richard Long. And it was put there in 2012 for the Olympics, because as we all know, Zigzag Hill and Box Hill was a key part of the cycle race. And ever since the Olympics, it has been a kind of a magnetic attraction for cyclists from all over this part of the country. And I can't remember a time that I've gone up Box Hill when there haven't been cyclists. One of the unfortunate side effects is that because there are so many cyclists, it was recently reported that Box Hill and Zigzag Hill is an accident black spot for cyclists. But we will go down and we'll end up here in Mickleham. It's the pub that I had in one of my early shots. Grade 2 listed pub, fine pub, and many other fine pubs are available in Mold Valley. But across the road, we have St. Michael's Church. This church, parts of it date back to Saxon times. A lot of work was done on it in Victorian times. And it's an interesting church, both externally and internally. Look at it externally, and you walk around, and on the far side of the church, from this view, you have this on the wall. When I first looked at it, I thought it was a chessboard, because it has got 8 columns across, black, white, all the way across. There were 8. But there's more than 8 from bottom to top. So obviously wasn't a chessboard. And when I looked it up and researched it, it appears to be based on actually what is now the flag of Surrey. And it's the coat of arms of the Earl of Surrey, dating back to almost medieval times. That's why you have that pattern on the outside of the church. If you go around to the front of the church, here in front of the entrance is this dominant white tomb, which I came across almost by accident. I've been having lunch in the Running Horse across the road with a cousin of mine who came across from Canada. And we walked across to look at this churchyard. And he was really surprised and impressed to discover that this tomb is actually a tomb to the Right Honourable Richard Bennett, who was the Prime Minister of Canada. And it's quite a surprise to find this Canadian Prime Minister to be buried here in a small village church in Surrey. Moving up to Poleston Lacey, which is probably the most famous of the National Trust properties we have in Mole Valley. This building, it's late Victorian with a lot of extensive modifications done to it in the early 1900s when Mrs. Greville, Margaret Greville, moved into it and it became her residence. Now, I've been volunteering at Poleston Lacey for a number of years. And whilst the COVID restrictions have taken place, of course, it was closed. And I was able to go back and go through the grounds as a volunteer just before it was reopened to the public. It was quite a strange experience to see it without people there. I'm delighted to say that it has reopened and they've been able to take people not only into the grounds but now back into the house itself, and it's wonderful to see it come to life again. But as I walked around it when nobody was there, I went down, and this is the Long Walk, and it's at the far end of this a few years ago that heritage paving stones were stolen one night, one of a number of thefts that have taken place at Poleston Lacey. If you walk around the grounds through the lower sunken garden, you get this view up onto the 1924 lead statue of Diana at the end of what is now the kind of croquet garden. If you go around here, this is the gravestone for Margaret Greville, and at the back there are these 4 statues. And if you're observant, you'll notice that the one on the left is slightly different to the others. And if we look at it in close-up, it's actually a different colour. And the reason for that is it's a replacement. The original statue was stolen. Why you steal a statue, I don't know, because it's not an easy thing to walk off with. But there had been a film crew operating at Poleston Lacey at the time. And as the place has been used for both Miss Marple's episodes and for Midsummer Murder, there's no shortage of fictional detectives who could probably help us discover exactly who and why the original statue was stolen. The grounds are lovely, and I took this late one autumn down in a walk down through the trees where there is this footpath. And there was this young girl walking through, and I just had to wait. I had to wait until she got to an appropriate point down there and took this lovely shot of a young girl walking down the Willow Walk late in the autumn. The setting of Poleston Lacey is fabulous. And here's again is an autumnal view taken from the front of the house, where you get these large, they're like stone vases and you've got the view that goes down into the valley, and it takes you up. And if you go up beyond those trees, you're up on Ranmore Common. The last piece of nature I want to take you to is Bookham Common. Very local to me. And during lockdown, I've been around it most days, either walking or cycling. And it's been great to see how many people use it. And you've got everybody. You've got people who would have been in their offices but have to work from home, who have used it to get exercise. And there are lots of people running and cycling around Bookham Common. You get young mums and families who are there with their youngsters in pushchairs. You get young kids on bikes and on scooters. You get dog walkers, and you get elderly couples who just go and walk around it to enjoy the scenery. It's a lovely place, not particularly large, but you need to go there and enjoy it. And if you go there early in the morning as the sun is rising, you get these lovely scenes of the sun coming in through the trees. And you also then get the chance to see this of a young deer that comes out, and they're very inquisitive. If you stand still, they will stop, they will look at you. And then they will move off to the right, back into the undergrowth to take cover. You get bird life. Is a blackcap taken on one of the trees in Bookham Common. The other birds that you'll find there, and here is a selection. You've got bullfinch. You've got a young thrush there with food. You've got a nuthatch. And you've got a tree creeper at the bottom right that I hadn't seen before. All these were taken on Bookham Common in the last few weeks. And there's also the bird hide. Now this sits there and it overlooks one of the ponds. And you need to go and pay some time, take your time, because throughout the season, the view there is always changing. Here is a little tiny moorhen, you can tell by the red beak, looking for its mum. You get the mallards doing their early morning ablutions, much flapping and water going in every direction. And on that tree in the middle of the pond, you'll find this sometimes, with 3 herons, one at each level, going all the way up through that tree. And they were there for about a quarter of an hour before they gradually moved away and cleared that tree. And the herons are regulars. And there is a heronry, and if you go and stand underneath it, you can get this view as you look up through the trees and you catch this very interesting view of 2 herons up there on the nest. But the star of that pond has got to be the kingfishers. Now, I took this shot. I'd been told that the kingfishers were back on that pond, and I went down there, and I'd been there for well over an hour, and I was about to give up and come home, when suddenly, out of nowhere, this little kingfisher popped up and sat on this twig about 12 feet in front of me, and thankfully I had my camera to hand and took this shot. A friend of mine took this shot a few days later, same pond, and this time, same little kingfisher, but this time with its mate. So Bookham Common, well worth a visit, and you need to go there any time of year, including in the winter, because it's a very peaceful place, and it's part of our natural beauty that we've got here, the natural heritage that we have in North Valley. My last place of worship is St Mary and St Nicholas in Leatherhead. Interesting feature about this church is that the tower is offset, and that's because of the ground that it's sitting on. But if you go up that tower into the bell tower, you'll find these wonderful collection of plaques that are there to celebrate various bell ringing events. And I like this pair that are side by side. They celebrate the ringing of the grandsire caterers, which is 5,003 changes, which to me sounds like an awful lot of bell ringing. But the interesting thing about them is that Arthur Dean was ringing the number 9 bell in February 1900 and was still ringing the number 9 bell some 29 years later, by by which time he had become bell captain and was the conductor for this thing. The church itself has just undergone a major internal renovation. And if we went there, this was taken last year, exactly last year, September, and the whole floor had been taken up as part of the renovation program. What I want to point your attention to is here, right in the foreground, you see the white and the red brick. And if you look into there, this is a vault that was under the floor, and in it were a series of coffins. And these coffins date back to the 1840s, and no one had seen them for over 150 years because the vault had been covered by the floor of the church. Now, the church knew where the vaults were, the records were accurate, and there were a series of vaults. But as part of the renovation program, they were opened up, everything was recorded, so that going into the future, they've got an accurate record and photographs of these hidden treasures that are under the floor of the church. Here is one of the other vaults, and you can see the archway of the bricks, and it's that hole in front which gave us access into that vault. And when I put my camera and a light in through that hole, that gave you this view of the three coffins that were in there. Again, hadn't been seen for over 150 years. And if you go into the church today, the renovation is just finished, this is what it looks like. It's a wonderful church, and it is now a church that is fit for the future. But under that floor, you have the vaults, and thankfully, everything has been recorded and we know what's there. Now, my final port of call is a complete contrast to this. I want to take you to something that is very modern. It's this year, it's 2020, and it's a forest, or it will be when the trees grow, because I want to take you up to Langley Vale and this, the Regiment of Trees, which commemorate the inspection of troops by Lord Kitchener in January 1915. It's a series of statues. And they're very stylized. There are no discernible features, but they are men in uniform that reflect the inspection that took place in 1915. And they're in three ranks, as they would have been formed up for inspection. And here in the front rank, you have a soldier in his full uniform, he's a sergeant. And he's fully equipped, although you can't see it under his right arm, the left side of him as we look at it, he has got a rifle. And here on the right-hand side, under his pockets, you can see the handle and then the scabbard for his bayonet, fully equipped. In the second rank, and that is the statue on the right, he is fully dressed, but he doesn't have a weapon and he doesn't have a bayonet. And then in the third tier, the man at the back, he is still in his civilian clothes. And that reflects the stages of training that they would go through. And it probably reflects the amount of equipment that they had when this inspection took place by Kitchener in 1915. As you've got those entering training, partially trained and fully trained before they went off to the Western Front in France. Very modern, very moving, very well worth a visit. And so finally, we return to the River Mole. And this time we're right up at the top left-hand corner, next to the Yehudi Menuhin School. And the river here is reaching the end of its time in our area as it disappears under the M25, heading in the direction of Cobham. That brings me to the end. It's been enormous fun researching this talk and going through the length and breadth of Mole Valley, looking at places of worship, looking at the heritage assets. That's Newdigate Church at the top right, and the gardens at the bottom left, that's at Polston Lacey. The vineyard is Denby's, and that's my favourite kingfisher at the bottom right. This talk has only been made possible thanks to the contribution of a number of friends of mine, and I would just like to recognise Alan Thompson, Eddie Hyde, and Gary Margetts, who have let me have some images to include in this talk. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it has encouraged you to go and look at Mont Valley with a new light. Enjoy the Heritage Open Days 2020. It has been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.